Hi, this is George Lee talking from Scotland to John Patterson in London. He's been at the, what's the festival you've been at, John?
Notting Hill.
Oh, Notting Hill Festival, where we last week we revealed some of the misdeeds of some of the North London financial services fraudsters who were led. Who was the man that I introduced you to last week, John? Hollick, yeah, Lord Hollick. But today I want to talk about someone who's a criminal but is a lord of the realm also. For several decades he was famed as our leading statistician in Britain. Now, the man is not actually British at all, and like Furhop before him, he was interned in 1940 or early in the war in an internment camp, and he was there because he was of German origin. Now, he's a German Jew, and he was in the internment camp for 4 months only. Then he was released. Since then he's become incredibly influential in the world of statistics, and he was the head statistician for our country, and he is now, for a very long period of time, is 92 years old, and his name is Claus Moser. Now, I will go on to explain the likeness to Santa Claus, who gets presents for nothing made by people who are actually slaves at the North Pole, and the likeness of his name to Moses will give you some insight into how he does his dirty tricks in the Parliament building as our chief statistician. Now, the importance of statistics in politics are of the utmost relevance to this discussion. Every night on our propagandized news we get released that this week we are in a period of growth, and that the economic crisis that we've been in ever since the noughties began, we are now moving out of. We are told on a daily basis that inflation is running at somewhere between 1 and 3%, and the statisticians just make that up, so that Nick Robinson at the BBC can appear with that broad smile and tell us that tomorrow everything is going to be okay. Let me tell you that Lord Claus Moser has his business registered in the House of Lords, and I will give you now his business details there. Claus Moser, registered address, House of Lords, Westminster, London, SWA 0PW, 92 years old. His director ID is 900 58 9824. Okay, I can give you a list of directors if that is relevant, but I want to tell you first about his holdings. Let me just run through his holdings. Okay, being a politician, being a numbers man, is linked strongly to Oxford. So he's a director, or has been a director, at Oxford Playhouse Productions Limited. He's an artist. You've heard Gordon Bowden use the term piss artist. I will confirm that this guy is taking the piss and a lot of the country's cash into private accounts. These are the rest of his holdings. Otto Schiff Housing Association, the Oxford Playhouse Limited, Yehudi Menuhin School Limited, in brackets the Jewish Care Pension Trustees Limited, the Oxford Playhouse Trust, National Numeracy, Glyndonborn Arts Trust, Paul Hamlin Foundation, Asconas Holt Limited, National Centre for Social Research, the British Museum Company Limited, Purcell School, the in brackets, That is important. He's a bigwig at Purcell School. Purcell School is one of the most expensive schools in the country. It's running in a pool of toxic debt like his businesses in the House of Lords. To carry on with his holdings, Jerusalem Foundation Trustees Limited, Central British Fund for World Jewish Relief in brackets the, Oxford Centre for Hebrew and Jewish Studies, Economist Newspaper Limited the. You remember the Economist newspaper with the woman who earns all of those non-executive directorships, Dame Helen Alexander, on the board of many economics news outlets for the whole of the period of time that they crashed the banks between 2004, when they brutalised several innocent countries in the Middle East. They crashed the banks up to 2008, and that woman was involved in the same economics vents in publishing and research, and she is making a fortune from her own students. Now this is a school...
She's a billionaire, George.
Yeah, that's right. She's an undeclared billionaire, because you have to pay to see the proceeds that she raises from each one of those companies, including people like Rolls-Royce in the munitions sector. So let me just carry on. So the final listing for these listings for Claus Moser is the Jewish Museum, London. Now, you heard my video the other day on the Rothschilds and Lord Nathan Rothschild, Nathaniel Jacob Rothschild, who runs a lot of the museums. He runs some of them under people's names that changed their names. Yeah, because they had the same background that this chap has. Now, he's pictured, if you look up Melvyn Bragg and his Oxford College, you'll see that Claus Moser had a very lucrative 90th birthday party with that man, who did I just say the journalist was that has the...
Melvyn Bragg.
Melvyn Bragg is a historian, and Melvyn Bragg pretends, he's been on my email lists for several years, he never responds, he makes ever so sophisticated and civilised programmes on the history of civilization and how human beings always just narrowly fail to get there because of some misunderstood part of the historical archive that largely hinges on human greed and brutality. So we just fail to get to civilization because people like these are at the head of it. I forget what the name of his Oxford College is, but the Purcell School, it costs you £30,000 per year to be a pupil at the Purcell School, and it's an art school, and it is in a toxic debt pool. And this guy is a director and getting unknown salaries from each one of those companies that we've just declared that he runs out of the second chamber. Okay, they've got links into the asylum sector. That school used to be an asylum in North London, and it's a really leafy looking place, let me tell you. If you look up Claus Moser on Wikipedia, or you look up his links to that chap that I just talked about, who's the Chancellor, Melvyn Bragg, you'll see all sorts of bow-tied photographs about how this man was adopted by the Royal Society of Statistics, how he became the chief statistician and civil servant for the UK government for several decades. That's how influential he is, from those dubious roots where he was interned for his ethnicity and his political beliefs. Just reading the output from Wikipedia is quite disturbing, but when you read the company check outputs, then you see just how disturbing it is. Okay, at the bottom of the page we've mentioned economics journals, and I've now discovered that the London Stock Exchange does have... You remember Gordon Bowden told me last week that there were no directors at the London Stock Exchange. The London Stock Exchange was a mysterious company. I've now discovered the directors. Let me read some of them off. Just to name them, they're not really huge names, but just to let you know that I've now gotten through that front that Gordon used to... Gordon would not let me go to the top of the pyramid and find out who actually runs the country. So we've got the current directors and secretaries at the LSE are Dr. Christopher Shaw Gibson Smith, Dr. Gian Pietro Natino, Dr. Alexander Stafford Justin, Dr. David Porter Warren. You remember the Warren joke about the rabbits and the war? Mr. Denzel Ministry Benedict Jenkins, Mr. Paul Hayden, Mr. Robert Stopford Webb, Mr. Simon David Martle, Mr. Stephen Paul O'Connor, and Mrs. Joanna Shields. Now those are all relatively anonymous people, but that's because they like to keep it that way. The list of people who are former directors includes much more famous people like Baroness Janet Cohen, Dame Clara Hedwig Francis First, Lord Robert Scott Alexander of Whedon, and this is, you know, the money-making stock exchange venture that Gordon talked about. Now some of them have been replaced by actors and their names get obfuscated by actors. So you have Mr. Donald Hood Bryden, Gavin Frank Casey. You remember Casey, that was the head of the FBI in America?
Yeah, William Casey.
Yeah, Giles Edwin Vardy, Martin Wheatley, that's an academic colleague of mine, Mr. Nigel Sherlock. Now, because Abel Danger uses the name, one of the Abel Danger nicknames is Sherlock, and the Sherlock detective, you know, all of it is obfuscated in popular culture. And you've got loads of Germanic names like Mr. Peter Richard Meinerzagen, Mr. Peter Schaffarel Wilmot Sitwell, Mr. Robert Anthony Metzler. I believe that the Metzlers were in the original banking dynasties. Mr. Rudolf Gottfried Müller, Mr. Stephen Paul Cook. So you can see how Gordon has explained for us the most powerful stock markets on the globe are the British, the Canadian, the Australian and the German. And the Chinese is coming, you know, a narrow fifth. And you've got names like Barker that we talk about much more in the context of those conspiracy theories around the Prime Minister's drinking clubs. But you've got Mrs. Jane Victoria Barker on the board of the LSE. Now this one is a shocker. I don't know whether or not she's related, but one has to assume that she may well be. Miss Michelle Monti. Does that name mean anything to you, John?
Monty.
Mario Monti?
Yep.
Yeah, you've got it. Can you see how they insert the niece or the nephew?
Yeah.
Then we've got a really big name in terms of the ownership of Canada during World War II, the ownership of Doctor Who in the TARDIS, Sir Anthony John Tennant, director, former director at the London Stock Exchange between 1992 and 1994. Sir John Kemp Welsh. He's the guy that has trillions at the huge banks and at the corrupted pension funds. So Sir John Kemp Welsh, strong South African roots, trillions of pounds at the bank, at the HSBC connections that person has. And then I want to make a dedicated video on these people, but you've got Sir Simon Mainwaring Robertson. Look him up. Sir Simon Manwaring it is, Manwaring Robertson.
Yeah.
Trillions at the bank. Links to those massive banking empires that brutalised the economy in 2008 and do it again on a daily or hourly basis using the corrupted methods that Gordon Bowden and I have talked about. Now you must realise the irony of the Captain Mannering joke. That's Dad's army that protected our country after the first 9 months of the war, where Hitler, uncontested, swept to the Channel coast. Now you know that World War II was fought for profiteering purposes, and you know that every one of the leaders in the major nations, Stalin and Hitler, were trained at Tavistock. Yeah, they were trained at Sydney Street, and they, together with Churchill and FDR, engineered the summits, they engineered the progress of the war, and they allowed Hitler to stay peacefully on the Channel coast from Dunkirk south for a couple of years, until Beaverbrook and Churchill, who were in charge of aircraft munitions and the naval ship production units, to arm our country to the teeth, to allow Pearl Harbor to occur, and then to brutalise 80 million people in World War II and to kill them in a profiteering conflict. The Mainwaring joke was because Captain Mannering, the man who looked after our country in that period, was a banker with a bowler hat. His wife was never identified in the comedy. All of the people in that comedy, the joke is a joke at the war dead's expense. You must know about Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was the man who was corrupted at a university. He had a university affair and was corrupted and coerced into extending World War I by 2 years. That's the affair that took in Untermeyer and Brandeis and their appointment on the Supreme Court in America, that extended the war in World War I by 2 years and sparked the ethnic hatred that started the World War II effort in 39 premeditated steps in the lead up to that. Now that book was written by Lord Tweedsmuir, who became the Governor General for Canada when Beaverbrook flitted across here to be the head of our propaganda effort. Yeah, so you can see the magnitude of the jokes, if you look up quickly the Purcell School, you'll see that they're in a toxic debt pool, and you'll see that now what we've got is links of these incredibly influential people to the Dresdner Kleinwort Bank from Frankfurt originally, where the Rothschilds started off. Now that bank has been associated with Hitler's efforts. So I've got a little clause there, and you've got incredibly influential bankers. There are 20 plus London subsidiaries of the Dresdner label, and I just discovered that this morning. It's a different part of my research database, but its registered address is 30 Gresham Street, London. If you look at all 20 of them in Britain, Dresdner Kleinwort, you'll find that the boiler rooms in Bristol that we talked about with Gordon are they're also used by this bank. Okay, it's on a separate page, and we can cover that ground again in a separate discussion if you want. But if you look up on Company Check, Dresdner Kleinwort Limited, then you'll find that this one's registered in 30 Gresham Street, but some of them are in Bristol, and they're all over the financial fraud empires that Gordon talked about. and what I've got on another sub-tab here is that this was Hitler's bank. And I'm led to believe that they funded concentration camps with no litigation or reparations proceedings coming at them. Then in London they've been behind the Gazprom funding and the Putin sponsored takeover by BP, of all people, of the Rosneft Association, which is the oil giant that was run by the Russian state before Putin and Medvedev began to swap the Prime Minister and the presidential roles out there. Yeah, so the Western manipulation of the Russian economy is absolutely massive. But I want you to know that when I make this video, I will put in fuller images of Klaus Moser. I will put it, because I believe that this is a joke about Santa Claus. Santa Claus never existed. The religious fraud that we have talked about in other videos mean that if you can have a joke in the House of Lords where you've got a German Jew who's pretending that he's not changed his name from Moses to Moser with the change of one letter, and he has swept the Jewish nation. Did I give you the list of Jewish interests in his director listing? Did I tell you about the 200 million debt pool that his companies are running from the House of Lords as his business address?
But so is this other guy, Zahir.
Yes, so Zahawi is a war criminal who is running his businesses as the MP for Stratford from the House of Commons. This guy's a little bit older and a lot frailer, but he is having a laugh, just like Nadim Zahawi, at the country's expense. It is massive, and I don't know what they get from going to the Purcell School and paying the fee of £30,000 a year, because in the old days, when peer pressure was really important and you could get a job in the arts sector, it might have been really important that you raise those fees. But now that school is also in a toxic debt pool, like the British government is, and all of us are paying private interests that run these things, and that is why I'm desperately keen in the next video to take you to General Sir Charles Guthrie, the head of the NMR Rothschild company, with Norman Lamont and other people who are financial criminals for decades. It takes you right up to the royal family and the Rothschild dynasty, and the Rothschilds that run the NMR Rothschilds banks have been involved in those NATO crimes that General Sir Charles Guthrie was involved in since he became a Blair life peer in 2001.
Well, listen, George.
You can hear my voice breaking up. It is tragic.
Go where the others haven't been.
Okay, shall I stop that one now?
Yeah, sure. I know you feel.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm just going to close that video down.